In this topic, we are going to cover Argparse. In the Python 101 for Hackers course, we made use of sys.argv for parsing and using command line arguments. But this approach can be messy and difficult to maintain and use over time. In this lesson, we are not going to explain how to use the command line or what a command line argument is, but we will instead focus on using the purpose-built Argparse module for parsing and performing sanity checks on data parsed as part of the command line. Argparse is a standard library module, so we don't need to pip install anything. And the module enables us to write command line interfaces, or CLIs, flexibly with Python. Argparse defines what arguments are required and will figure out how to parse data entered on the command line during execution, whether to actually perform execution or to complain that required parameters are missing or incorrect. Let's start by importing the module and creating our first CLI, which accepts positional arguments. Positional arguments are read from the command line in the order that they appear, after the script name, and with Argparse, they are required unless otherwise specified. So let's start by importing Argparse and saving this, argparse demo.py. And now we can instantiate an instance and assign this to the parser variable. We can give this a description, example Python CLI. And now, whenever we want to specify which command line arguments the program will accept, we can use the add_argument method. So we could say parser.add argument, and we might want to have an argument for hacker name, which we specify to be a string. And we might also want to add hacker_power, which we specify to be an int. And we can execute this. And we can see no output because even though we've now defined our parser, we still need to parse the actual arguments. So we can do that, parser.parse args, and execute this again. And now we can see an error message, which says the following arguments are required: hacker name and hacker power. We can also see more details if we specify Python argparse demo.py with -h for help. And now we can see some more details about how to run our script. And we can also include information to be displayed as part of this help output. So we could say help equals enter the hacker name, and help equals enter the hacker power. And now we can see that this additional information is included as part of the help output. And now we know the positional arguments which are required, so we can run this again and we can specify the hacker's name and their power. And we can see that Argparse no longer complains. And we can also print out the arguments which have been received. And we can see that the hacker name has been assigned to Newt and the hacker's power has been assigned to 10. And the name is a string whilst the power is an int. And as well as positional arguments, we can also add optional arguments using dashes. And optional arguments are not required unless specified, and they can also be added to the command line in any order. And an optional argument is also, by default, given the value of none when it's not being used. So let's add an optional argument here. Parser.add argument -bh, which is short for black hat. And rather than use the default of none, let's use a default of false. And we can specify an action here of store true. And as an action, this defines what happens when the command is provided on the CLI. Store true stores the value true into the argument if it is provided on the command line. So we can view the help here again. And we can see that we still have our two positional arguments as well as an optional argument here. We can execute this. And we can see that black hat has been given the default value of false. We can also specify that Newt is a black hat using the long form, and this is now true, or also using the short form, also specifies to true. And we might also want to specify that this optional argument is also true. So we could say here required equals true. And now we can see that if we omit -bh here, we receive an error message. The following arguments are required. And we can remove this required equals true here. We might similarly want to add an option for a white hat hacker. So we could say -white hat, -white hat. And we might default to being true. We can execute this. And we can see that by default, black hat is set to false and white hat is set to true. And if we change white hat to store false, we can specify white hat. And we can see that black hat is now false and white hat is now false. If we omit white hat is set to true. And if we add black hat is set to true. And using Argparse, we can also specify what a valid choice looks like. So for example, we might want to specify the hacker's type as a string, -ht, which is short for hacker type. And we might only want to specify 3 choices here. So someone is a white hat, or they're a black hat, or they're a grey hat. And we can take a look at our help menu. And here we can see that the help menu has been auto-populated with this information. So now we can specify our hacker type to be white hat. And we can see our hacker type reflected here. And if we try to add something blue hat, which is not in the choices list, we see an error message, invalid choice, blue hat, choose from white hat, black hat, or grey hat. And we can see that by default, the hacker type is set to none because no hacker type has been provided on the command line. And again, our output here is telling us anything in the square brackets is optional, whilst hacker name and hacker power are both required. And we can now also access this data from within Python. So for example, we might want to print out the hacker's name. Which is Newt. Or we might want to perform some different kind of action depending on whether the user is a black hat or a white hat hacker. And then we could print this information out. We can execute this. Newt is a white hat type of hacker. Newt is a black hat type of hacker. Depending on the command line arguments, which have been provided to the script, will influence how the application behaves. Argparse is a useful and powerful default part of the standard Python library that allows you to create and configure powerful command line interfaces for scripts. But that's it for now, and in the next lesson, we are going to cover project number 1, remote DLL injection.